loves. I am Madame Luna, here to guide you into a gentle tale shaped from starlight and quiet roads. Before we begin, remember to subscribe so you never miss these moonlit stories. And tell me in the comments, if you could rename a constellation tonight, what would you call it? Crescent sparkles. Now find your most comfortable breath. Let your shoulders drop and allow the night to carry you. The Constellation Weaver. They said the Constellation Weaver traveled with a loom small enough to fit inside a satchel and large enough to hold the whole sky. No one had seen the loom clearly. When villagers tried to describe it, they ended up describing feelings. The sweetness of early peaches, the hush of snow that falls when you are the only one awake, the way a moth decides to trust your open palm. The weaver arrived in Starling Harbor on a wind that smelled of tide and pine tar. She wore a coat the color of dried lavender and boots that knew the shape of unpaved roads. Children said her hair had a silver thread running through it, like a river stubbornly crossing a field. She set a wooden stool in the square, greeted the pigeons like old colleagues, and hung a sign that read, "Tell me what you have lost, and I will find its pattern in the sky." People came slowly. In Starling Harbor, new things were approached the way cats approach puddles carefully, with delicate suspicion. First came the lighthouse keeper, cap in hand. "I have lost my sense of when a storm ends," he said. The weaver nodded and asked him to hold the loom while she threaded it. He braced himself out of habit, as if for a gust, but the loom was light. Its frame was made of something that was not wood, and not bone, and not quite memory. She worked without hurry. Her shuttle picked up glints of afternoon light and carried them back and forth, like a gull ferrying small truths. When she finished, she offered the keeper a cloth as thin as breath. "Look up on the next clear night," she said. "Search above the harbor's mouth. The pattern will show you storms that are tired of being storms." He folded the cloth into his pocket and left without speaking, his eyes glass bright. By dusk, others gathered. A baker with flour dust in her hair said she had lost the recipe for sleep. A teacher confessed she had misplaced the names of certain birds and was afraid to call to them in the morning. A boy, knees grass-stained, whispered that he had lost his best friend to a faraway city and feared letters were not enough rope. The weaver listened. She asked questions that felt like someone opening a window in a room you had forgotten you were allowed to enter. Each time, the loom sang a low note that made people stand a little straighter. Each time, the shuttle carried the day's last gold to build a new map. For the baker, she wove a constellation whose lines turned like a spoon. "Stir the sky with your eyes," she said. "Count to 30 while the Big Dipper listens." For the teacher, she stitched 3 points that perched together on a wire of light. "These birds never forget their names," she said, smiling. The boy received a small square of cloth with knots you could feel but barely see. "A tether," the weaver told him. "It stretches between 2 skis. Tie one end to your window latch and the other to your friend's last letter. Sometimes the knot will loosen. Sometimes it will hold so firm you will think it is your hand. Either way, the night will keep watch." darkness pooled in the corners of the square, the weaver folded her loom and tucked it back into her satchel. She bought a bowl of fish stew from a cart and ate it slowly, turning her spoon like the hour hand of a tired clock. The harbor bells bored holes in the dark and then filled them with sound. The weaver watched the lighthouse blink and blink and blink, as if agreeing with itself over and over. That night, the sky behaved like an attentive host. Stars settled into their chairs without scraping them. You could hear a gull yawn. The baker stepped outside in her flower apron and tilted her head. Above the northern pier, a small arrangement of stars swirled clockwise, 1, 2, 3, pausing as if waiting for a taste. She went back in and slept with the window open, her breath stirred by the quiet spooning of constellations. The keeper stood on the catwalk with his hand on the rail and felt something in his chest uncoil. Out beyond the shoals, clouds made decisions more quickly than they had in months. Rain fell, and then politely excused itself. He laughed, a sound the tower hadn't heard since before the bad winter, and the laugh traveled down the stairs like a child sliding. On the second day, a woman with a green scarf came and said she had lost a story she meant to tell her grandmother. The weaver unwound a length of midnight blue thread and asked the woman for 3 details. The woman said it involved plums, a broken umbrella, and the way my grandmother cut paper into snowflakes that looked like maps. The shuttle darted and clicked like a small animal making up its mind. When the cloth was finished, the weaver held it to the light. The map that appeared looked like a city that knew it was a maze and forgave you for getting lost. Say the story now, the weaver told her, and the woman sat on the square's low wall and began to speak. Passers-by slowed. Pigeons stopped performing their important errands. The plums, the umbrella, the paper maps, they landed back where they belonged, and the woman cried without hiding it. That evening, a boy named Nico arrived with a cracked violin. I have lost my courage, he said, so softly the wind almost took it. The weaver nodded and placed the violin next to her loom. The two looked oddly at ease together, as if they had been old neighbors who only now remembered to wave. She wove a thin, almost invisible ladder between 3 modest stars. Climb with your breath, she said. Each rung is a note you can hold without apology. Nico played that night on the pier. His bow trembled, but his feet were steady. The ladder in the sky hummed faintly, reminding him of rungs he could trust. People stopped. Coins clinked. Someone cried again, the way you cry when something you didn't know you lost shows up at your door smelling like new bread. The third morning, the mayor came in a coat that looked expensive even when it tried not to. He cleared his throat and said the weavers' gatherings were blocking foot traffic and encouraging loitering, which was his least favorite verb. He suggested a permit, a schedule, a cap on the number of stars woven per day. The weaver listened. She offered him a cup of tea from a thermos that had crossed mountain passes in another country and still remembered the taste of smoke. He accepted. She asked him gently what he had lost. He bristled. He had not come to be asked questions. but her gaze stayed kind. Finally, he said, "My brother and I, when our mother died, we stopped speaking well. We speak, yes, but the sentences are made of wood." The weaver's loom hummed the low, lake-sounding note again. She wove slowly, and when she finished, she handed him a bookmark, a sliver of cloth with a tiny bridge stitched between two glittering threads. "Put this in the book you mean to give him," she said. "It is easier to cross something that is already a bridge." The mayor left without discussing permits. The square exhaled. If you stayed near the weaver long enough, you learned her rules by osmosis. She would not weave to help gamblers guess. She would not stitch patterns for revenge or to make anyone fall in love. She would not tell you the ending of your life, because that would ruin the only good surprise. But she would weave a map for grief that could be folded small and kept in a pocket. She would stitch a nightlight you could only see when crying, and a path that showed itself to anyone walking home with heavy groceries. The questions people brought were never tidy. A fisherman had lost the part of himself that whistled. A seamstress had misplaced the word for violet in her mother's language. A child said her fear came at night, like a dog that knew how to open doors. The weaver's answers were not tidy either, but they were the kind that made you breathe more slowly. On the fifth evening, the sky forgot to be blue and went straight to indigo. The weaver lit a small lantern whose flame behaved like a well-mannered guest. A man in an orange sweatshirt hovered on the edge of the square. He did not sit. He did not speak. Finally, he came forward and said, "My wife and I had a child who didn't stay." No one moved. The weaver's hands paused above the loom. "Tell me what you named them," she said. He said the name as if the letters were stepping stones. The weaver tied a knot, and then another, her fingers precise the way surgeons' hands must be when fixing very small urgencies. She created a constellation so gentle the air around it seemed to lean in to listen. 2 stars near enough to hold hands. A third that rose and rested and rose again. "We will see them?" he asked. The weaver said, "You will see the shape that holds what you already know." He nodded and left with the cloth pressed to his chest. That night, the harbor was especially quiet. Even the lighthouse blinked more slowly, as if it understood. There were skeptics, of course. A radio host called her a hoax. A scientist said her patterns were coincidences, and that the human brain is a greedy pattern hunter, wild for meaning. The weaver smiled and said, "Then let it hunt. Meaning likes to be found." She did not argue on air. She did not attend debates. She kept weaving. Her patience made quicker things look fidgety. The only time she looked tired was when someone asked for what could not be woven. A man demanded a constellation that would make him win arguments. A furious teen wanted a pattern that cursed the boy who laughed at her stutter.